You're not there anymore. If we can truly love our enemy as Jesus told us to, he no longer is our enemy. And by the way, remember that passage in Romans 5? While we were still his enemies, God reconciled us to himself. You see, he loved his enemies. And it breaks my heart that for years I preached that God loved us, but if we didn't do certain things in this lifetime, we would be tortured forever. That's not a loving God. A loving God is what Jesus was talking about in Luke 15, where the shepherd went out and searched until he found the last sheep. And when he found it, he brought it home. We're to love one another as God has loved us. As I have loved you, Jesus said, so you're to love one another. How much did he love his disciples? How much did he love us? So much that he gave his life to accomplish God's purpose that was set in the ages past, and that was to reconcile the world to himself. So we have a new creation, a new relationship, a new commandment. Then we're told that what Jesus taught was a new teaching. Mark chapter 1, verse 27. Don't try to turn there because we're going to go someplace else, but listen to it. Mark 1:27. The people were all so amazed that they asked each other, what is this? A new teaching. A new teaching. And with authority. He even gives orders to evil spirits and they obey him. Jesus brought with him a new teaching, something that was not what those Jewish ears had heard. Well, what is that teaching? I think that it can be summarized in what Jesus read from the scroll of Isaiah when he went into the synagogue of his hometown. He stood up to read, we're told. He took the scroll of Isaiah, and I want you to turn. Let's see, where do I want you to turn? I want you to turn to Luke 4, but also to Isaiah 61. Because we need to see the contrast. Jesus didn't read the whole passage. He stopped. Why? Because it's a new teaching. Let me get there. Luke chapter 4, beginning with verse 18. And then Isaiah 61. Now, in Isaiah 61, the Spirit of the Sovereign Lord is on me because the Lord has anointed me to preach good news to the poor. Now, what did Jesus say when he read from the scroll? The Spirit of the Lord is on me. This is in Luke 4 now. Because he has anointed me to preach good news to the poor. Well, that sounds familiar, doesn't it? And then Isaiah says, he has sent me to bind up the brokenhearted, to proclaim freedom for the captives and release for the prisoners, to proclaim the year of the Lord's favor and the day of vengeance of our God. Now keep that in mind. Now go back with me to Luke chapter 4. He has sent me to proclaim freedom for the prisoners and recovery of sight for the blind, to release the oppressed, to proclaim the year of the Lord's favor, period. What's the significance? The old teaching was about God's vengeance. But the new teaching is good news. Good news. And so we have a new teaching. He intentionally left off reference to the vengeance of God. Isn't that interesting? We also have a new covenant. In Luke 22, verse 20, in the same way, after supper, he took the cup, saying, "This cup is the new covenant in my blood, which is poured out for you." Now, covenant means agreement. It's sometimes testament, Old Testament, New Testament, Old Covenant, New Covenant. Covenants were always established by blood. There was always bloodshed when there were covenants made. If you go back and look in Genesis, when God made His covenants with Abraham, there was bloodshed. But we have a new covenant. This cup, He said, is the new covenant of my blood, which is poured out for you. 2 Corinthians 3:6. You're still at 2 Corinthians 5. That won't be hard for you to get back to. 2 Corinthians 3:6. He has made us competent as ministers of a new covenant, not of the letter, but of the Spirit. The letter kills. The Spirit gives life. Our new covenant is not one of death and sin and alienation. Our covenant is one of life and reconciliation. It's a totally new covenant. And guess who made it? God. God said it? It is. I can't resist going to Hebrews now. And if you really want to know about the New Covenant, read Hebrews, because Hebrews was written primarily to the Jews. And so therefore, the writer of Hebrews was really communicating about the Old Covenant, the New Covenant, contrasting the two, how the New Covenant is superior to the Old Covenant, how the New Covenant has replaced the Old Covenant. We don't have time to read all the way through it, but if you'll start really with chapter 8 and go through chapter 10, you'll see what the writer of Hebrews says about the New Covenant. But I want us to focus on just a couple of verses, and the first one is Hebrews 8:13. By calling this covenant new, and by the way, that's the same word that's used back in 2 Corinthians 5:17, where it says that we are a new creation. By calling this covenant new, He has made the first one makes you want to dance, doesn't it? Yeah. Or wave a hanky. And what is obsolete and aging will soon disappear. By making a new covenant, He made the old one obsolete. I don't know how many of you have written your will. I have a will. I had to have it notarized and signed by 2 witnesses, and that is what we call the last will and testament, covenant. But if I go in and change that, guess what? That old one's no good anymore. It's irrelevant. And that's what God has done. Oh, folks, this ought to get you on shouting ground. God has established a new covenant, and because of that, the old covenant is obsolete, and it will soon disappear. And then, before I get my blood pressure up too high, go with me to chapter 9, verse 15.